Have you ever discovered a secret so dark, so disturbing, that it changed everything you thought you knew about someone? These stories reveal the chilling truths people have uncovered about those closest to them, secrets that left them questioning everything. Stick around until the end and tell us, what's the most shocking secret you've ever learned? Story 1, The Final Betrayal. My father was always a reserved man. Loving but distant. When he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, I thought I had braced myself for the inevitable. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered after his death. The last day of his life was heartbreaking. Hospital COVID restrictions prevented my mother, my sister, and me from being by his side. We called, we texted, desperate to reach him, but he never responded. Even the ICU nurse assured us that he was awake and communicating normally. But at 3:30 a.m. he was gone. By the time we were allowed to see him, he was unconscious, unable to hear our final words. Later that morning, as my mother rested, I went through his belongings. His phone sat among them, untouched. Seeking comfort, I scrolled through our last messages to him. None had been read. Not one. Confused, I assumed he had been too weak or in pain to respond. But then I noticed a messaging app one had never seen before. One open conversation. One contact. A woman's name. Curious, I tapped on it. And that was the moment my grief turned into something else. Every message was filled with deep, personal confessions, terms of endearment, declarations of love. Princess, I love you. I can't wait to see you again. And then, the worst of it, she had been messaging him right until the moment he died. He had ignored his wife and children in his last hours, choosing instead to spend them talking to her. As I scrolled further, the truth became unbearable. This wasn't just an emotional affair. The woman was 19 years old. My father had met her when she was just 17. She was his former high school bus passenger. He was 66. A week later, I found her online and confronted her. She confirmed it all. They had been together for 2 years. My father had spent his final moments speaking to someone younger than his own grandchildren. I have no way to confront him now. No way to get closure. Just a bitter truth I wish I never uncovered. What would you do if you discovered a dark secret about a loved one after they passed? Story 2, The Best Friend Who Wanted More. She was my best friend. We did everything together. Laughed until our stomachs hurt, celebrated each other's triumphs, comforted each other through heartbreak. She was family to me. So when my husband and I moved out of state and she begged us to come back, we did. For her. At first it was wonderful. She was over nearly every night. We cooked together, shared secrets, lived as if nothing had changed. But something had. And I only realized it when it was too late. The change was slow, subtle. She would stoke small arguments between my husband and me, texting each of us separately, validating our anger, feeding the resentment. With me, she planted the seed of doubt, a backup plan. If things don't work out with him, she'd say, you can always move in with me. We'd have an amazing life together. Meanwhile, she whispered different things to my husband. She confided in him about her infertility struggles, told him she dreamed of having a baby who looked just like him, that she only needed a sperm donor. She wove a fantasy where he fathered her child and I, her best friend, helped her raise it. When my husband and I finally pieced together her manipulative texts, her behavior became crystal clear. She wasn't just trying to ruin our marriage. She wanted to create a family, one that didn't include him as my husband, but as her child's father. When we confronted her, she exploded. She denied everything, turned the accusations back on us, and then, when she realized we saw the truth, she became unhinged. She showed up at our home in the middle of the night, banging on the door, screaming to be let in. We had no choice. We moved. We changed our numbers. We disappeared. Looking back, I can't believe I once considered her my best friend. She wanted me, but not in the way I ever imagined. Have you ever had to cut off someone you once trusted with your life? Story 3, The Family Secret That Should Have Stayed Buried. After my great-uncle passed away, my family discovered a box in his attic. It looked like an old chest filled with keepsakes from his past. We opened it, expecting dusty old photos and forgotten memorabilia. Instead, we found horror. Inside were images of rallies, cross burnings, and men dressed in white hoods. My great-uncle had been a grand wizard in the Ku Klux Klan. And the pictures weren't just of meetings, they showed lynchings. They showed real people, real pain. Evidence of violence that history books had only hinted at. My family was horrified. We had always prided ourselves on being progressive, inclusive. My ancestors had been civil rights activists. One of them had even worked on the Underground Railroad. And yet, here we were, staring at undeniable proof that one of our own had led a life of pure hatred. The shame was overwhelming. My family's decision was swift. We burned everything. We removed his gravestone to prevent anyone from commemorating him. We erased his name from family records. And yet, sometimes I wonder, was that the right choice? Should we have kept some evidence? Should we have acknowledged the truth even if it was painful? Because even now, that dark stain lingers. Would you erase a family member's dark past, or would you keep it as a reminder of what should never be repeated? Story 4. The unsettling truth. Have you ever had a gut feeling that someone in your life might be hiding something truly dark? That eerie sensation that, just beneath the surface, there's a truth too disturbing to comprehend? That's exactly what happened to me. For years, my uncle had always been an enigma. He was the kind of man who thrived on making people uncomfortable, someone who enjoyed unsettling conversations. At family gatherings, he would casually drop grim details about his past jobs, always choosing the kind of stories that made everyone fall silent. We thought it was just his personality, a bizarre fascination with morbid tales. But over time, his stories became too specific, too vivid, too real. One evening, we were sitting around the fire at my cousin's wedding reception, and the conversation turned to unsolved mysteries. Someone brought up the infamous case from our area, the one about the missing victims who were rumored to have been fed to pigs. No bodies were ever recovered, only whispers and rumors of what had really happened. My uncle, sipping his whiskey, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You'd be surprised what pigs can eat," he said, his voice a little too amused. At first we laughed it off. But as he continued talking, the details of the case started aligning disturbingly well with his past work history. He had worked at a slaughterhouse during that time, and he often made cryptic remarks about how little waste pigs leave behind. The way he spoke that night, his eyes gleaming with an odd satisfaction, sent chills down my spine. After that evening, I couldn't let it go. I started digging, talking to older relatives, reading old articles, piecing things together. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. My uncle had been close friends with a man who had been a person of interest in the case but was never charged. That man had disappeared years ago, and no one seemed to know where he went. My uncle? He never mentioned him again. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe. But the way he spoke about those murders, the smugness, the almost proud tone in his voice, it haunts me to this day. What do you think? Was it just a dark sense of humor, or was my uncle hiding something sinister? Story 5. The hidden truth behind our ruin. For years, I believed my grandfather's death was the reason we lost everything. My dad always said that the stress, the medical bills, and the grief led to his business failing. It made sense at the time. His company was doing well before my grandfather got sick, and shortly after his passing, we lost everything. We had to file for bankruptcy, give up our car, and eventually move into a tiny apartment in another city. I watched my dad struggle to get back on his feet, and the financial strain lasted over a decade. I carried that belief with me for years, allowing it to shape my understanding of loss and hardship. It fueled my passion for suicide prevention charities. I thought I knew firsthand the ripple effects of tragedy. But then, after my dad passed away, I found a stack of legal documents while sorting through his belongings. What I discovered shattered my perception of the past. He had been sued for aggressively harassing a female employee at his company. She had filed a complaint, and when he retaliated by firing her, she took him to court. He lost the case, and the financial fallout from the lawsuit destroyed us before my grandfather had even passed. For years, I had clung to a story that wasn't entirely true. My grandfather's death was tragic, but it wasn't what bankrupted us. It was my father's actions. I had spent my whole life believing my dad was a victim of circumstance, but in reality he was the cause of our downfall. So now I ask you, have you ever discovered a truth so devastating that it changed everything you thought you knew? Let me know in the comments. Story 6. The father who never loved me. Growing up, I always knew something was wrong between my dad and me. He never spoke to me unless he was yelling. At the dinner table, we sat in silence, and if we ever exchanged words, it was maybe twice a year. But with my younger brother? He was affectionate, warm, he loved him in a way I had never known. It tore me apart. I spent my entire childhood wondering what I had done wrong. Why did he love my brother but not me? Why was I treated like a stranger in my own home? It got to the point where I hated him for it. But even worse, I hated myself for hating him. For 23 years, I believed my father despised me. But then, my grandmother, who was like a mother and best friend rolled into one, finally told me the truth. He wasn't my real father. My biological father had left before I was born. My mother met the man I called Dad when I was 1, and once my brother was born, his real son, he resented me completely. He never saw me as his own, and so he treated me like I didn't belong. Looking back, it all made sense. The coldness, the neglect. Friends used to ask me if he was really my dad because of how differently he treated me compared to my brother. I always defended him. Of course he was my dad. My mom wouldn't lie about something like that. But she had. No matter how bad things got, she never told me the truth. She let me spend years thinking I was the problem when all along, it was something I had no control over. That betrayal left me with deep trust issues that I don't think I'll ever fully overcome. Have you ever been kept in the dark about something so important that it changed your entire life once you found out? Share your thoughts in the comments. Story 7. The haunting secrets of my childhood. Ever since I was a child, there was something off about the house we lived in. My parents always told me I had an overactive imagination, but the strange noises, shadows that moved when no one was there, and the cold spots in the house weren't just in my head. One night, I saw it, a figure standing in my doorway watching me sleep. I was frozen in fear, unable to move. The figure didn't step forward, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, an eerie presence looming in the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Years later, I discovered the horrifying truth about the house. It had once belonged to a family who mysteriously disappeared, leaving everything behind. No one ever figured out what happened to them. Was it their spirits still lingering? Or was something even more sinister at play? Have you ever experienced something truly unexplainable? Let me know in the comments. Story 8. The disappearance that wasn't what it seemed. When I was 15, my best friend, Daniel, vanished without a trace. One evening we were hanging out like any other day, and the next morning he was gone. No goodbye, no clue as to where he went. His parents were devastated. The whole town searched for him, but he was never found. For years I wondered what had happened. Had he been kidnapped? Did he run away? The uncertainty haunted me. Then last month I got an anonymous email. It contained a single attachment, a picture of Daniel. But it wasn't an old photo. It was recent. He looked older, different, but it was him. The background of the picture showed a street sign in a city I had never been to. No message, no explanation, just the photo. I started digging and uncovered something I wasn't prepared for. His family had been hiding something dark. The night he disappeared, his father was arrested on suspicion of abuse, but the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. Did Daniel run to escape? Did someone help him disappear? Now, I have more questions than answers. Should I try to find him? Or is there a reason he never came back? What would you do if someone you lost suddenly reappeared in the shadows of your past? Let me know in the comments. Story 9. The stranger who knew too much. It started with a phone call. One evening as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang from an unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me answer. A man's voice, calm, almost amused, said, "I know what you did." I felt my stomach drop. "Who is this?" I asked. He chuckled. "You don't remember me, do you?" I racked my brain. The voice wasn't familiar. "I think you have the wrong number." He sighed. "Come on, you can't pretend forever. You were there that night. You know what happened." My hands started shaking. I hadn't been anywhere suspicious. I hadn't done anything wrong, had I? Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He mentioned a place, an abandoned bridge outside town. A place I hadn't thought about in years. The last time I was there, I was 16. My friends and I had been messing around, daring each other to walk along the edge. That night, someone went missing. A local guy just a few years older than us. The police ruled it an accident, said he must have slipped and fallen into the river. His body was never found. We all moved on. We didn't talk about it. But now, years later, a stranger was calling me, claiming to know something. "I'll be in touch," he said before hanging up. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've noticed strange things. Someone watching me from across the street, a car following me for blocks, my front door unlocked when I swore I locked it. Who is this person? What do they think I know? And more importantly, what really happened that night at the bridge? Have you ever been contacted by someone who seemed to know too much about your past? Let me know in the comments. Sometimes the most innocent-seeming stories hide the darkest secrets. And sometimes the people suffering the most are right in front of us, completely unnoticed. Have you ever experienced something that, at first, seemed normal, but later turned out to be something much more chilling? Tell me in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, this rabbit hole only goes deeper.